You're listening to The Affiliates, a podcast that features stories of entrepreneurs and young leaders who are changing the world for better every single day. My name is Alok Rathod, and I'm a film producer best known for projects such as Choice and The Doorbell. I'm sitting down with leaders to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how to make an impact. In this episode, Nick talks about overcoming his addiction, the importance of developing good habits, and the value of surrounding yourself with successful people. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thanks very much for having me.
So, what's your story?
My story. Okay, so brief background. Spent over a decade addicted to hard drugs and alcohol. Alongside that, watched my father suffer with MS for my entire life, pretty much. And the combination of two, coming out the other side of the drug addiction and seeing my father, really gave me a different perspective on the importance of health and doing things that we love in life, and basically creating a lifestyle that really fits what we want to do. And from that, I became a peak performance coach. So one of my passions is figuring out why people do, and almost as importantly, if not more, why people don't do things. And, I'm fascinated by the human experience. So basically, sort of from that, it sort of made it was the next step for me to become a peak performance coach and really help people learn what I've been learning over 15 years of just being fascinated by the subject in my own time, researching and learning and reading, and then obviously applying this to myself and keeping myself on the straight and narrow, and transforming my own life, and then being able to use those principles and strategies to help other people, create a life that they love.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite fascinating because although I personally haven't really overcome an addiction in my life, but I've seen people around me who go through such situations, and it's so difficult to overcome, especially if it's like a decade. But that's really interesting. How did your education play a role in helping you develop a career?
Well, so education and me were an interesting mix. I never really got on. I never really enjoyed school particularly. And, I was always the class clown, the one that liked to rebel and, do things my own way. I mean, it hasn't changed very much to the modern day. But, I didn't really pay attention in class. I was more interested in just having fun. So how education in the formal sense of the word, i.e. going to school, helped. Probably not huge amounts to the amount I could have achieved from it. But outside of school, I dive deep into subjects that fascinate me, like psychology and diet and fitness and all these sorts of things. So, from an education standpoint of being able to read books, that's one of the things I love about the modern world is the access to all this information. We've got access to YouTube with all these incredible people, books, podcasts like this, and it's really interesting and really lovely to know that there are so many resources out there. So to answer your question, the traditional sense of education didn't play a huge role for me because I didn't embrace it. But outside of school and the traditional ways, books and that sort of path have really, really helped me over the years craft what I am today.
I feel after a point, every entrepreneur feels that there is more learning that I could derive from my experiences rather than just sticking to the books. And I think when I was in college, I was still the class clown. I mean, right through my school and my college, that was me. But I think in my case, it really opened up my mind to embrace new ideas and how the industry changes, and because I studied business and I used to work with JP Morgan, so it really helped me put into perspective how these concepts are applied. But beyond that, I'm also a filmmaker now, so as I was growing up, I was also kind of fascinated with more and more about human psychology and the emotions and the societies and all the mix of that. How does that lead to a good story? And Yes, that's why, like, in a way, that's my way to differentiate myself, where I focus on culture as part of my storytelling rather than, like, any other aspect. So, let's say, like, the first film that I ever made was a Japanese film, and it focused on, like, how Japanese values play a role in friendship and fame and success and all of that. And it was quite interesting to explore that. But I feel because education these days, it's so modular, so in terms of, like, just accessing resources and using that to your advantage, you don't need to really go to university to get a 4-year degree or a master's degree. You can get those skills outside of university as well. And
Yeah,
I
I think the mainstream way of doing education has its uses, absolutely. I think there are some valuable things you can learn. What I do think though is that it misses out a huge proportion of really valuable teachings that don't get taught, like how to use our mind, for example, how to what mindset that we need to create to be successful and to be happy in life, and things with finances, and what debt is and how to be responsible around that, and budgeting. These are some of the few of the things that I think that the mainstream education system leaves out, or at least in most countries. I'm sure there are some countries that are leading the way with that, but for me, it's I only ever really get involved and dig deep into subjects if I'm fascinated and there's a use for it, and it's there's practical application. So I think I think it has its uses, but I think it's limited for sure.
Great. So, what's your process of developing a great brand?
I think for me, with creating my brand, it's firstly, it always comes down to understanding who you're marketing to, who you're helping, who you're speaking to, and getting a really clear understanding. So, for example, the majority of my clients are entrepreneurs, and those are the people that I can resonate with the most because it's the journey that I've been on over the years, and they're the people that I can help the most. So getting a clear understanding of who your audience are and what makes them tick and how you can help them is essential, because whenever you put any form of marketing material out to anyone in the world, then you need to understand how to talk to them. When I'm writing a piece of content, or I'm putting out a post on Instagram or whatever it may be, I have my ideal client in my head when I'm writing that. So it's just a much easier process, and I think this is something that a lot of entrepreneurs miss. They sort of gloss over. They just think they're going to try and connect with as many people as possible and help as many people as possible, and actually all that does is water down the brand, and doesn't make it, it doesn't help to pinpoint the communication. So I think that's absolutely essential, first off. And secondly, I think being authentic is something that's really, really important to me. Both sort of in the way that I act and the way that I put information out there. I think it's very easy in the world of social media these days to put a front on, to put a face on, and present the world an image of that person. And for me, it's really important to demonstrate the reality and the authenticity of who I am, and just be myself. I mean, there's a whole magnitude of beneficial reasons for being oneself, and being happy with that. I spent a lot of my life hiding behind masks and presenting the world what I thought it wanted me to present it to, and ultimately that doesn't really help. It just covers up, and people see through that as well. I think people are getting much wiser to the idea that people want to see vulnerability, people want to see reality and authenticity, and I think that connects way more. So to answer your question, it's know your audience inside out, understand what makes them tick, understand how you can help them, and be authentic when you deliver that content.
Right. And I think, going back to your point of authenticity, it's so difficult to determine these days that, who is a real deal and who is just pretending on social media, because there are kids out there now who are going to, like, private plane pads and clicking pictures and then, like, taking the bus home. So you never really know, like, that, okay, like,
Mm.
is it real deal or not. But I think I agree that being authentic is really important, and reaching out to your audience in a way that they understand your content is important, because they really see through that authenticity, I feel. Because maybe you can, like, fool people like for some time, but then eventually your mask will fall and people will see for who you really are. And if you are not a good person or not authentic, then that's kind of a problem, at least for entrepreneurs. Because a lot of people I see these days, when they are out of college or when they're out of university, the first thing when they think of when starting a startup is that, they want to get rich quick. And I think if they're going by that mindset, then they've already got it wrong. Because people won't just, like, buy into your products or give you money just because you want it. They want to see a product that resonates with them, and of course, like, it adds value and and it's authentic. So I agree with every point that you mentioned, and I hope that, more people heed your advice and be more authentic.
Yeah, I think we're definitely starting to see that. As I say, I think people see through this a lot more these days, and actually, I think the truth comes out in the end. So, authenticity for me is very important, and and also being honest when it isn't going right. Things don't always go exactly to plan. Whether you're a peak performance coach, an entrepreneur, someone at school, or whatever, it's important to show the sort of the negatives of side of life as well as the positives.
How has the people around you, specifically your friends and family, inspired you?
So, growing up, being addicted to drugs and alcohol, the people I chose to spend a lot of time with, in a lot of the cases, probably weren't the most. Um, how do I put this? They weren't the best influences on me when it came to getting to the goals that I wanted for me in my life. So, I actually spent a lot of time and made a point, and I still make a point of being very selective of who I spend time with. Aristotle said you're the average of the five people that you spend the most time with, and he knows his stuff clearly, but it's very true. It's something that's said a lot these days and bounced around, and people sort of take it for granted. But actually, who you spend time with is critical. And again, like I said in the previous questions, we live in a wonderful world where you get access to podcasts, audiobooks, hardback books, and all sorts of other resources. So you can actually spend time with people without actually physically being with people, if that makes sense. So to answer your question, not a huge amount of my sort of friends when I was growing up. There were obviously selected people, and family have always been loving and supporting and being there. But I've always had quite lofty goals and ambitious goals, and things didn't always turn out exactly how I wanted to them. I had multiple businesses before that didn't go the way that I thought they would go, and I've learned from those failures, and I've moved on, and I've been stronger for it. So I think really it's an important question, and one that people probably should look at a bit more often than maybe one does. And people say, yeah, I understand that. I know it's really important to spend that time, the time with people that are supporting and pushing me to my next goals. But actually, when they analyze it and look at their own lives, typically find that it's not always the case. So, yeah, I believe it's very, very important how the people have influenced me. Some of them have influenced me incredibly well, and I choose to spend more time with those sorts of people. Other people try and get you down and are negative about life, and I choose not to spend time with those people. So it's over the years it's fluctuated.
That's amazing, and I can certainly identify with that. Because when I was back home in India, I was like, kind of just okay and like going about with my life without really having any clear idea or direction where I want to make my mark. But then once, I think, when I went to Harvard, I saw that mental shift happen in my perspective. Because I went from like someone who was like very introverted and not, like, very well spoken and didn't have any ambition or goal in life, to becoming an exactly opposite person, which had, like, like, lofty goals and like always want to do this and that. And I think that in part was fueled by the environment that I was in, because I saw more people around me doing good stuff, and I aspired to be more like them. And because I received support, I mean, the only reason I have my film production company in New York is because a friend decided to help me out. Otherwise, I wouldn't have one. But I think I certainly agree that you are the average of five people that you surround yourself with, and that in large part also factors into how I choose to spend time as well. So I try to surround myself with people who are like, enthusiastic, with like-minded goals, and wants to make a difference in the community and the larger world. So it's interesting how, like, how much you can learn and grow just by surrounding yourself with people like that. And I think, like, that would be one of the advice you would give people as a peak performance coach, I suppose.
Absolutely.
So how would you say is your leadership style different than others?
Well, I think leading is done by leading by example. So I think rather than telling people, you show people, and demonstrating by doing it yourself first. And it's very easy to bark orders and suggest and tell and preach to other people how to live their lives and do things. But ultimately, I think people respect you way, way more when you go out and actually do it yourself. So when you're telling people to eat a certain way, or when you're telling people to train a certain way, or use certain techniques for being more productive, you've got to demonstrate that yourself. You've absolutely got to, in my book. I think that's an incredibly important aspect. And again, people will see through when you're telling people to eat a certain way, and maybe you're not following it. It's very easy to get caught out these days, especially on social media and all these sorts of things. So I think it's imperative that you lead by example. I mean, I don't know if this is very different. I know a lot of people who do it this way. I mean, I suppose there are a lot of people that don't do it that way either. But for me, it's all about leading by example, saying what you're going to, doing what you say you're going to do, and owning and putting your hand up when you mess up and you make mistakes, because ultimately we are all human.
And that's so profound and human thing to do, because I was kind of a person who had a different belief, because when I moved from JP Morgan to my family business, my dad had the same fear that, I would just bark orders on people because I'm the owner's son, so I don't really need to be accountable for anything. So I think that he ensured that, okay, I always, like, knew my place and I respected everyone equally. But I think a lot of people don't really understand that part. They feel that leadership is an authority. I feel it's more like a responsibility, because um, you have to first understand the challenges that are involved in each job that people do for you, and then you can lead effectively, because now that you're aware of challenges and uh, potential, you can lead them in a way that they can um, bring out their best. And I think it's important that a lot of people understand this, because we live in an age and society where things are changing so quickly that we need more effective leaders to make that impact. Otherwise, a lot of startups I've seen around me that have huge potential, but because the leadership is flawed, they are not able to, like, make a difference. But I certainly believe that leading by example is a good way to go, and it's certainly more impactful than just being an authoritative figure. So what kind of impact would you like to see your work have on people?
So my whole mission is to basically help people live the lives that they want. I struggled for many years with drug addiction, as you know, and I struggled for many years trying to build my business and create the lifestyle that I wanted. I mean, for me, ultimately, I want to live life on my terms. I don't want to be dictated to by someone else, and I want to create a life that I love. and that's all that I want to do for other people. I want to help people realize their potential. I want to help people be more productive, healthier, fitter, everything that they basically want, and that makes a difference to people's lives. And that's all I ever want for people, is I want people to realize their own potential and go out there and do what they want to do, and help as many people as possible.
I certainly believe that um, it is it is imperative that um, people live life on their terms, in the sense that they are aware of what they want and work towards that, because I feel a lot of people don't really focus on that, and they just get so used to the system that's out there. So people would be scared to give up their job and start something of their own, or even just the side hustle of, like, making some money on the side while they're working somewhere else. A lot of people don't do that, even though they're passionate, is because they're so fixed into the system that they cannot, like, break out from that. um, and I think once people are aware, then the possibilities become more and more obvious. And of course, along the way, people like you, who are a performance coach, can help them reach their potential and really make their dream a reality. But I think for me, it I wasn't aware of it that I'm doing it, but subconsciously I was, in my early 20s, just going through different things that I thought I could turn into a career. And then after like 3 or 4 years of, like, just really trying out different stuff, I was able to boil it down to films and finance. And education, of course, played a role in helping me develop that. But I think what you're doing is really important in the long run, because a lot of people would then go out and, like, try to replicate the same thing that you're doing in terms of success and the impact. So that's really good. uh, Before we move on to next question, I want to go back to the alcohol and drug addiction part. So how does one fall into it, and, like, what does it take to come out of, like, something like this, especially if you're affected by it for almost a decade?
So one falls into addiction, I believe, by who we spend time with. Like we alluded to earlier in the other questions, that who we spend time with has a huge impact. And my old counsellor used to say, if you spend enough time in a hairdresser's, you'll get a haircut. And I think he's very right. You spend enough time with people that are struggling with drugs and alcohol, then the likelihood is you're probably going to go down that path as well. Whereas if you're spending enough time with people, spending the most of your time with people that are striving to better themselves and grow and build businesses or whatever it is for them, then you're probably more likely to go down that route. So I think my path ultimately started just by spending time with people, and I was attracted to that way of life for whatever reason. Spending time with people that sort of went down that route. So that's ultimately how it started, and it progressed. As the years went on, it progressed and got into harder and harder substances, and and more different scenarios. So that's how it started. And it progressed from there. With regards to escaping from addiction, for me, it's been over 6 years now, since I left that world. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of discipline, and it takes a lot of support and help from other people that are in a place to be able to help people. I spent time in rehab with a man called Peter Davies, who I am eternally grateful for being able to put the mirror on me and really expose myself and understand myself and see the implications and the reality of what my situation was at that time. And going through that process really woke me up to say, okay, something needs to change. And then from there, it's really a case of instilling new habits and practicing those habits over time. My podcast is the Daily Habits Podcast for a reason. I believe that our daily habits ultimately create the life that we have, whether we cultivate good or bad habits really sort of dictates which path we go down. So for me, it's all about those habits, and who you're spending time with reinforces those habits, or makes you want to create new ones or different ones. So it took me a long time to really get out of the grips of addiction in a way that I am today. And it was, it wasn't easy, but once you've made that decision, it becomes easier. That's the key thing, is to be able to actually make that conscious decision that enough is enough, and it's something needs to change. So ultimately, it's just a constant, continuing try to. I mean, ultimately, being free from addiction is easy in some sense, because all you've got to do is not drink or use drugs. That's the only rule that you have. But obviously, it's slightly more complicated than that. But you just need to do as much as you possibly can to put yourself in an environment and a position that sets yourself up for winning. I mean, that's ultimately what I teach my clients in their businesses or in their lives. It's ultimately putting themselves in an environment and situation and creating the habits that are going to cultivate the results that you want. So it's been a combination of environmental factors, building your habits, wanting to do it, and getting the support and help needed to make it happen.
That is so inspiring, and just listening to your story makes my problem seem so small and insignificant. I
Well,
mean, like,
we all have our own versions of life, right? Our own problems.
but I certainly have not faced a challenge so formidable and that requires so much of dedication and discipline to overcome that. And I guess, like, maybe I will as the time progresses and I go through other situations in my life. But it's just so inspiring to see that you were able to overcome this, and it's something that I'll keep in mind next time when I feel like daunted by any challenges. I'll just make sure that, okay, I'm aware. Okay, Nick was able to overcome this, so maybe, like, it's not as bad as he had it. So
Well,
that's good.
that's ultimately one of the reasons that I share my story so openly as I do, because a big part of what I want to achieve in life is obviously helping entrepreneurs live the life that they want, because I believe entrepreneurs can have a greater impact than most normal people most of the time, not always. But the reason I share my story so openly is that if I can do what I've done and come from where I've come to where I am now, hopefully I can inspire and motivate other people to take action required to change their life. So yeah, it's lovely to hear you say that, and I appreciate your feedback. That's ultimately why, one of the main reasons I do this.
Great. So, what's next? What are the exciting projects that you're currently working on, and what can the listeners expect from you going ahead?
So lots of cool things in the pipeline. My podcast, Daily Habits podcasts, I love it. We're upping the ante. We're putting out 2 episodes per week now, which is fun. I love interviewing people, as I'm sure you do, and it's one of the reasons you probably started this podcast. So that's going really, really well. We're coming up to episode 30 very soon. And Google, I run an event at Google's London campus, which is an event for entrepreneurs. It's in the heart of London in Shoreditch. It's a free event for people that, entrepreneurs that want to come and mix with, like we said earlier on the call, who you spend time with is really important. And spending your time with people that really want to build big business, build a successful business and have fun doing it and create a lifestyle that works for them. I've got loads of cool speakers. I talk about my stuff, and it's really, really inspiring. Lovely place. The feedback we've had for the first event was incredible. So the next one's happening 7th of August in London. So that's cool. So really, it's a continuation of that, building the coaching practice. I have financial targets, obviously, for the business, and I also have targets to help as many people as possible. So yeah, just a continuation, really. The events, helping people, one-to-one coaching, and then there's an accelerator program that I'm going to be using, which is basically a group setting. So teaching what I teach to my one-to-one clients, but in a group setting, and then have an accountability structure around that.
That's really fascinating. And, I'll be in London very soon, hopefully around uh, September. So probably, like, if you have any events out there around that point of time, I'll certainly love to join and catch up with you. Um, and thank you so much for sharing your story and all the amazing insights with the listeners. As I'm sure, like, the way I am inspired, they also might be. But more importantly, it's your personality and the character that I've sort of come to like appreciate, that you're a man of such like discipline and dedication that really sets a good example for a lot of people, and certainly for me. I mean, like now that like I've listened to your story, I aspire to be more like you in terms of just being a human being. So thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your story. And I wish you all the best for your future endeavors.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'll if you're around in September, we've got an event coming on, and we'll definitely connect for sure. No, look, thank you for having me on. It's I say I love sharing my story and love sharing what I'm up to, and if that can inspire and motivate other people, then that's ultimately the reason I do it. So thank you.
You've been listening to The Afflators. If you like what you have heard, do us a favor and share the episode with your network on social media. It helps. If you would like to know more about the show or share your opinion on the episodes, connect with us on facebook.com/UNCIAFilms. That's facebook.com/UNCIAFILMS. If you would like to support the crowdfunding campaign of my latest film, The Doorbell, then click on the link mentioned in the description. Even a single dollar helps. Thank you so much for listening to The Afflators.